Hi, welcome to the International Space Station Flight Control Room, where we have joining us here today Camille Alleyne, who is the Assistant Program Scientist for the space station, and she's going to tell us a little bit today about some of the science experiments that are specifically aimed at getting students involved in science and STEM activities.
That's right.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so I think one of the ones that we hear a lot about is the Sally Ride Earth Cam, and I know that that's been back in operation lately, and maybe you have some updated results on that for us?
Yes. So what's new about Sally Ride EarthCam since last month when the last mission was held is the record number of students that we've been able to reach with that mission. During the summer, we were able to reach 34,000 students, 562 schools in 34 countries across 6 continents. And so those are record-breaking numbers for us.
That's very impressive.
Very impressive. EarthCam stands for Earth Knowledge Acquired by Middle School Students, and it was an educational project developed by Dr. Sally Ride and her company, Sally Ride Science, really back in Expedition 2. So it's one of the longest running investigations we've had on board the space station. And it is targeted at middle school students and engaging them in their studies of science if they're doing geography or geology, for example, or math. They do the trajectories, they calculate the trajectories of the space station. So what they do is that they select different targets around the Earth that they are interested in, different geological features of our Earth, and they send those targets up to the camera that's programmed on board the space station. And then as the space station is flying over those targets, it takes the images, and those images are then downloaded, and the students have access to them. So they are actually getting the real life features of these different sites versus what may be in the textbook developed 2 or 3 years ago.
That's got to be exciting for a student to take a picture from space, basically.
Very exciting. The other aspect of this project, which is very, very interesting, is the fact that the students who actually manage the program, they run the missions, are undergrad students at the University of California, San Diego. They are the ones who upload the targets. They are the ones who download the images and put it on the web, accessible to all students.
So it's a student experiment run by students.
Exactly.
Cool.
And so we feel like we are growing the next generation of mission operators and flight controllers based on this, the opportunities they have to manage this program.
That's really amazing. I'm sure that's a exciting program for the students.
Yes.
And then I know that sometimes they also get to actually talk with astronauts via ham radio. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, that's called the ham radio on ISS. And students, it's another global program like EarthCam. Students from all over the world get access real time to the astronauts. If the ISS is flying directly over where their school is or where the event is taking place, called a direct contact, they have about 10 minutes to talk to the astronauts. Or even if the astronauts are in the sleep period and school is in session, there's a way to telebridge that connection through some ground stations that are located around our Earth. And the students still get to access the astronauts. And it is an amazing, amazing, inspiring experience because they instantly realize that they're talking to another human being that is off of the Earth, in a real-time situation. So it's a very inspiring, very engaging activity.
Have you gotten to listen in on any of those conversations?
I have actually. I've been a part of 2. One in my birth country of Trinidad and Tobago, where there was an auditorium filled with 400 students from all over the Caribbean who had never ever dreamt about space, didn't know anything about space, and they got to learn about space communications, how we communicate to the ISS, but also in the anticipation of getting to speak to the astronauts. You can tell, just the excitement and the engagement and how it really inspired them to go off and do their studies in a more effective and better way,
I hope it does. Well, I guess NASA isn't the only one who has some of the educational science experiments. European Space Agency also has some that they're working specifically with Alexander Gerst this time around.
That's right. That's correct.
I think the Flying Classroom is what it's called. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, it's an educational payload demonstration demonstration that we do across the partnerships. And what he's specifically focused on is demonstrating fundamental physics properties in space. And so, for example, he's going to access just everyday items that's on board the space station. For example, he's going to demonstrate the movement of a gyroscope using two CDs and a rod that will connect them, and looking at the stability of the gyroscope's angular momentum relative to the trajectory of the ISS as it orbits the Earth. Another one he's going to look at is how pure water forms in space versus how it would form on Earth. And the principle states that forming decays at a much slower rate in space than it is on Earth. So by him mixing air and water together in a syringe, shaking it vigorously, and forming those foams, he would look over time at how it decays and compares it to what's happening on Earth. So it's an observation that the students are going to see how different principles are demonstrated in microgravity environment.
Those are probably pretty difficult things to explain here on the ground. So
Absolutely.
That's a big help for teachers.
Exactly.
And so the video is just provided to teachers or
Yes, it's available to teachers on the website. In this particular case, it's a ESA demonstration, so it will be available on their website. NASA does, our astronauts do EPO demos that are available on the NASA website.
Okay. Well, I know the Cygnus is getting ready to leave now, but when it arrived, it brought with it a few of educational experiments.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go through some of those?
Yes, those are called the Spaceflight Student Experiment Program, run by the National Center for Space Science Education in partnership with NanoRex Corporation, which is a commercial entity. And they give students access to sending their designed experiments to space. So two were very interesting to me. One was looking at the crystallization and coagulation of proteins. And that's really important to us because one of our very high valued biological research that we do on space station is the growing of protein crystals. So thinking that high school students could actually design a similar experiment looking at how proteins grow. And we know when proteins grow in space, they grow at a much bigger size and much clearer than they would on Earth. And that gives insight into the structure of a protein, which is very beneficial to designing different drugs and therapeutics for diseases. And so to have high school students being able to develop a similar experiment looking at how this particular protein is crystallized in space is very, very interesting if you think about that.
Absolutely. What's the crew's involvement in that? Do they need to work with the experiment themselves, or is it pretty self-contained?
They are expected to activate and deactivate the experiment, but while the experiment is going on, they don't have any access to it.
Okay. All right. Well, that's easy to get that done with the minimum use of crew time.
Exactly.
And then I know also the station program works to connect science with students on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of the other ways that we do that?
So, Brandi, the space station, we did not build the space station to do education activities and projects. But the presence of the space station and the presence of the crew members on board the space station really acts as an inspiration and a way of engaging students in their studies of science, technology, engineering, and math. And so it is a way for us to give access to students, give them access to doing experiments on board the space station, and really growing the next generation of STEM workforce, not just for the U.S., but for all across the world.
I don't know if you would have any examples, but I know we have a lot of students who have come through here as interns and co-ops and things like that. Are you seeing any of them come from programs that have done anything like that? Do you track that at all?
I started talking about that in the beginning with EarthCam, right, with the graduate students at UCSD who were trained to be mission operators for this particular EarthCam. We have a few who are actually working here as flight controllers in mission control. So that is a concrete example
already
of how
reaping the benefits.
Exactly.
Well, thanks so much. This is fascinating. I'm sure a lot of people will want to get their own students involved, so you can go to nasa.gov and find out more about all of these. Thanks again. This was Camille Alleyne joining us, the Assistant Program Scientist for the International Space Station.